ACR, how we're recording. Some people in the ACR are folks who work on family matters like divorce or elder care. Some people work with courts to settle lawsuits. Some people work on commercial disputes. We've got ombudspersons who work in organizations to help people who are interacting with the organizations. We have conflict coaches who work just on one side of the conflict to help people with negotiation and strategy. We have people who do employment and workplace. We have people who do community mediation and neighborhood disputes, restorative justice, folks who specialize in healthcare, folks who work internationally, and we have a couple of those who are going to be talking today, including me. Folks who teach and research about dispute resolution, and people who work on environment and public policy matters. And that last group are the people who are in the EPP section of ACR, Environment and Public Policy. And they work on all sorts of environmental matters, green and brown. So you might find them at a Superfund site helping the community to organize facilitating talks within the community so that they can have meaningful input. Or they might be working with the people who are on the hook, the potentially responsible parties, and try and figure out how to allocate cleanup costs. We don't have many going on right now, but they're negotiated rulemakings where you bring people together before an agency makes a rulemaking. You bring together the potentially opposing sides who might haul the agency into court and see if they can negotiate and agree on a basis for a consensus on the rule. Um, our members design or facilitate workshops to gather public comment. We facilitate advisory boards. We work on the folks in the group who work on water rights disputes, on administrative agency enforcement cases, on court cases, on local land use, on facility siting, on land management planning. And mostly as neutrals, but we're also trainers and coaches and process designers and advisors. So that's ACR and that's EPP. Every year, ACR has a conference, and last fall it was at Temple University in Philadelphia. And at these conferences, there are always lots of worthwhile presentations, but also lots of interesting side conversations happening between sessions, during meals. And that's when three EPP members from the DC area began to talk about ways to encourage networking among members. And those three were, and I'm going to see if they can sort of wave themselves in or just say hello. The Eva Schiffer is waving. Rebecca Beauregard is waving. Eva, go back to my speaking notes. So Eva is a facilitator specializing in international development work and creator of my favorite stakeholder identification analysis tool, NetMap. Rebecca is a vice president at Cairns and West, and she oversees the contract to supply dispute resolution talent on demand to the Department of the Interior. And I'm the third person. So we decided to design some networking opportunities for members and colleagues with a focus on people in DC and the Mid-Atlantic. And this is our first session, and it's a virtual one open to people across the country. We're already
I don't
planning a
think
second
so.
session
No, I said I replied. No,
and an
making
in-person
sure you hold that.
gathering at someone's on. Could you mute, please? An in-person gathering at one of the local parks, so keep an eye out for that. So our agenda today, we're going to put you into random breakouts for a short session to allow you to meet a few new people or renew contacts with old friends. More about that in just a second. Then we'll reconvene with the chance to learn about and from four featured professionals, two very senior members and two up-and-coming mid-level members. And they will interview each other and give you a chance to ask your own questions via the chat, or if it works, we'll let people have the floor and speak. And finally, as time allows, we'll open the floor at the end, perhaps for some feedback on our session and closing remarks. So about our breakouts, to acknowledge Cameron Huchek from Kearns and West is our Kearns and West are our Zoom hosts, and Cameron is going to put us all in breakout rooms for 5 minutes. Someone in each room will need to take the initiative and go first. Remember, fortune favors the bold. And we'll ask you each to answer these questions. What is your name? what is your quest? Or if you don't have a quest at the moment, a series of other questions that Rebecca is going to put in the chat, such as what do you do, why are you here, what do you hope to gain from this, what sets you apart, those kinds of things, or anything you actually want to talk about, just to get a little quick picture of yourself across to the other people in your breakout. So, for example, my name again is Ken Rosenbaum. And my quest is to help people air differences, understand one another, and work through change. I suspect that that's true of a lot of people in EPP. I'm a solo consultant, but I've been a congressional staffer, a policy advisor, a facilitator, a mediator. Um, and I've done lawsuits. I've worked help people develop legislation. I've taught university courses. I've worked on brown issues and green issues. What sets me apart, I think, are my professional degrees and background in both forestry and law, and I really enjoy helping people work together. So that's kind of why I'm here. So without too much further ado, and to keep basically in schedule, which is sort of falling apart already, Cameron, could you stick us all into breakout groups? Take a peek if you want, again, at the chat. And then let's see you all back here in about 5 minutes. Well, welcome back. I hope that that was a useful little session, that you met some new people. Those of you who registered, when you registered, we asked if we could share your email addresses, and if you said yes, then you'll be on a list that we'll send out to folks after the program is over. But I'd like to go into our discussions with our selected professionals and start with Sophia Soto Reyes and Frank Dukes. Sophia is a senior associate at the Consensus Building Institute. She's a facilitator and environmental policy expert with some deep experience in conflict resolution, climate adaptation, and collaborative governance. And she's worked internationally across continents and in different contexts, helping organizations and people build capacity for inclusive and equitable decision making. She's trained as a mediator, but she's not a systems thinker. And she brings both heart and mind to the work of turning tension into transformation. That's what we do. Frank Dukes is probably known to many of you. He's a senior scholar at the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at the University of Virginia. He's a mediator, but also an educator, designer of collaborative change processes, and she's dedicated to helping communities and organizations navigate through tough environmental and social challenges. Um, he's got, he's one of our senior guys. He's got decades of experience in conflict resolution. He's worked across Appalachia, the Chesapeake Bay. He's worked with historic communities, working through issues nationwide to foster healing and dialogue and justice. And he's there when you need him most. So those are the people we're going to start with, the two we're going to start with. We're still having some trouble getting Deb Dalton on the line. We hope she's here in the next 10 minutes. But I'm going to pass it over to Sophia to interview Frank. Up to
Great.
you.
Thanks so much, Ken. Thanks for those introductions. And hi, everyone. It's a joy to be here today. I'm really excited. Um, I'll just start with our first basic question, Frank, is, and if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into this field and into the work that we do.
Okay, and I have to say it's so hard not to be talking to everybody
Yeah.
individually. All the people that I see just on my screen alone, I see Pat and Mary Lou, and Kate Kapishki. Oh my God! So, but I won't take up more time. So there's so many ways of answering that question. I think
Mm,
just being raised in a military family, and understanding um, as much as I admire pacifists, I'm not a pacifist. My mother's family was all occupied by the Germans, uncle in a concentration camp. And so, you know, the sort of tension between the harm that's done by violence, the harm that's done by conflict, and the need to intervene, and the harm that's done by, by military action, as we're seeing today, um, in Iran and so many other places too. So always having that tension. And then just personally, um, I was uh, really making a living in Charlottesville, Virginia, in music. I was actually I had a piano restoration shop. And I was kind of tired of not being effective at dealing with conflict and happened to get turned on to a psychologist. Some people may know Bob Emery. He did some of the early research on child custody mediation. And he said there were some people that were starting a community mediation center. So I got my start in community mediation and just got fascinated. I want to learn more. George Mason University had a program. I went up there. It was hard to find it. There was no internet. Um, it wasn't listed in the college catalog, which is a paper catalog of the time. But eventually found it and just got fascinated at this idea that there was actually something you could do with what to me was a very mysterious and kind of dead end, idea of conflict. So that's how I got started in the field and then just kept growing and kept studying and kept learning. And Howard Bellman here was someone who I was able to shadow while doing some work way back around 89 on a sheep scraping negotiation and learning from many, many other people as well. So that's how I got my start.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate the sort of take back and the orientation of where your sort of who you are as a human came into play as you grew into this profession in this field. Um, I wonder if you could share, we've been talking over the last few days about a story or a particular case that you think about that you learned a valuable lesson. I'm sure there's many, many. So it's always hard to pick one, but would love to hear about that.
Yeah, and Sophia, we talked. Um, I think most of the lessons come from things that went wrong, or things that I did wrong, or maybe didn't do wrong, but learned that it might be better not to do again. But I think
Hmm.
we were talking and just really thinking about the idea of theory, and
Yeah.
that can be a turnoff to some people, but really theory is, as I understand it, is really just hypotheses and knowledge that you build up that allows you to be more predictable, to help you understand what is going on in conflicts. And just to give an example, one of my early projects was part of the team at the Institute, then called the Institute for Environmental Negotiation at the University of Virginia. We were working with Shenandoah National Park. I imagine some of the people here have spent time at Shenandoah National Park.
Hmm.
And we were working, actually, the park is much smaller than its authorized boundaries, not just its original authorized boundaries, but still the authorized boundaries. So there are many, many homes and people living within the authorized boundaries of the park. And the Park Service was undertaking a study of the related lands, the lands that were within the boundaries, and just to see which ones might make sense. They cannot condemn land, they don't have any condemnation power, but often they can work with like the National Trust or other organizations that purchase land and then donate it to them. And they didn't want to just do that randomly. But as you might imagine, what people in the communities adjacent to the park heard was the Park Service is studying land so they can take it. So
Mm.
I had a theory of conflict, much informed by John Burton and other people as well, Abraham Maslow, um, others as well, around human needs and how much they drive the behavior of people. My director at the time, Rich Collins, who Laura Bockel knows, um, really thought that the opposition to the study of the park was coming from the wise use movement, that it was being driven by the people who do not want to see public lands at all, who want to be able to exploit the resources that are there and so forth. And I was arguing with him that no, I think it was an idea that people were being driven to act by their fear, their insecurity, and particularly their identity. The
Mm.
identity of the people that had been original settlers in Shenandoah National Park was trashed. They were told that they were de-evolving. Their culture was backwards. And that continuity from way back in the 1930s to at what was then the 1990s had really never left. the identity that was taken from them, the recognition of that they were in fact smart people, creative people, and the security was something that I thought was driving people. So I invited some of the biggest opponents to the work that we were doing to come to my classroom and have a conversation about needs and so forth. And I did that in part to build a better relationship with them, in part to test this sort of hypothesis that I had. And I just shared that idea, to how important was their identity, not using that language. So anyway, that was one of the examples for me where the idea of having a theoretical basis for the work we did was important. And I uh, um, was able then to have a better relationship, and those people actually ended up participating in the project, still opposing it, but with more of a sense of humor and better conduct. And I need
Um,
to be asking you, Sophia.
yeah, I'm going to suggest you switch just for a matter of
Yeah,
time. Please go ahead, Frank.
perfect.
So how
Thanks,
did you
Frank.
get in? How did you get in
Yeah.
here?
So I would say I came into this mostly through the environment, but sort of by process of elimination in terms of when I did environmental policy in my undergraduate degree, and then I left and worked at a big think tank. Um, and it was really cool and fun, and there was like lots of fun tools, and I met lots of really interesting people here at the World Resources Institute in DC. But I felt there was sort of kind of a disconnect for me personally around like the direct impact of these big think tanks. And I had studied sort of transboundary water disputes in the world for my undergraduate. So I moved to another institute, the Environmental Law Institute, and I got introduced to peace building and environmental peace building and the concept of conflict management via that direction. And it was, I guess, was a process of elimination as well as like gathering words to describe the things that we all now know and do. But this is a field that I think, at least for me, I didn't know it existed. And so I arrived here and I started working at CBI, which I call my CBI season one, which was before graduate school. And now I'm in my CBI season two, which is after grad. So I came by that way and really just have learned and enjoyed and evolved and sort of understanding what this field is and what you can do. And then I went to graduate school and I worked at another organization for a while. And then I came back to CBI because I really love the projects that we do and the way that we use conflict resolution and the environment sort of as means to solve really nitty gritty problems. And also just like going back to your point, Frank, about sort of human dignity and the theory behind this is like we're dealing with complex beings. And so I really appreciate sort of the melding of those two things together. So that's how I arrived here.
Yeah, and we talked, that sort of goes right into, we talked about having the theoretical foundation and having
Yeah.
conflicts. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So in my last job, I worked at a small B corporation that does training and some facilitation, but mostly we do like training in conflict management, facilitation and meeting design, and difficult conversations. So or collaborative negotiation rather. And so that was a really wonderful way to take what I got in my CBI season one and sort of funnel it into these general frameworks that allowed for really grounding myself in the ways in which we can work and where these kinds of sort of pattern recognition and problem solving that we all do every day in our daily lives, how that kind of comes into being. And I think the lesson in that was that both learning to explain what we do to people who don't know and training them in these skills, perhaps not in the context of the environment, but really just um, how deep listening and interest-based negotiation, all these different things is really helpful in all facets of our lives. So the lesson there was really learning that, grounding myself even further in that theory and really being the like teacher of that has made me a better facilitator on the other side as I've been in my season two of CBI. And really particularly around that pattern recognition and sort of building the cases under your belt around how you see the ways forward and how you can support folks in doing their work and getting the places that they need to get. So
Really well
that's
said. I've got
plan.
tons of questions, but I think we have to turn it over. Hopefully, Deb is on. Is that true? Or
Yeah, Deb is here, but I'd like to ask if folks in the folks participating in our audience have any questions that they want to raise the speakers. I just want to keep hearing them talk. But uh, but if folks have questions or things they want to either put in chat or raise a hand so that we can recognize them, even if you just want to say hello. So yeah, I didn't realize you had links to the Environmental Law Institute. I have very deep links there too as well.
Yeah, it was
And
a
I
long time ago. I was just an intern, but they helped me a lot.
and I
Right.
have a story about him we can talk about later, Sophia.
Okay, that's great.
Well, I'm not see oh one new wait. Um so just a jump to another meeting thing. I'm not seeing any other questions in chat. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Um I think that I will why don't we put you on in reserve and bring our other two speakers up and then would bring you back as necessary if people have questions later.
Sounds great.
So our next pair, our second pair, are Deborah Dalton and Anna Rossi. Deb is retired from the Conflict Prevention and Resolution Center at EPA, and she has nearly 4 decades of experience in shaping federal programs in public engagement and environmental mediation. And she's brought all sorts of people from government, industry, communities, advocates together to craft really good solutions, or hopefully good solutions, but really lasting solutions for a healthier environment. She's a recipient of US EPA's highest career honor, and within ACR, the EPP Sharon Pickett Award for her national contributions. And it's no exaggeration, I think, to say that Deb's work has really helped define the field of environmental mediation in our country. Um, Anna is a senior associate at Cairns and West with experience in science communication, environmental policy, and natural resource management. And she's managed both the kind of contractual end of projects and also the hands-on consensus building side of dispute resolution projects. She applies systems thinking like Sophia and data-driven approaches and tries to align people and processes and outcomes. So Deborah Dalton, Anna Rossi, welcome. I'm going to turn the floor over to Anna to ask some questions of Deborah.
Thanks, Ken. Um, Deb, similar question as Sophia was asking. Can you share a little bit about how you got into this space? I know we talked a little bit about our overlapping contract experience and transitions in various ways. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? My
You
thing.
sound
Okay,
good.
great. Okay, good. I had a little bit of trouble getting on because for some reason my Wi-Fi in the house is all done. So I got into it because I was working at the EPA. I'd been there about 10 years, maybe a little less, and I was working in the Superfund enforcement program, and we were basically at the very beginning of the program in 1981, going after responsible parties to clean up. And we didn't really have a great grounding in negotiation theory or anything else. I mean, they were lawyers and I was support as a tech support, helping write the technical details of documents going to the courts. And after a few years, it was just a slog because, as we have seen over the last year or so, it takes a long time to get any kind of real decisions from a court. And in the meantime, the sites were still leaking bad things, and the community was getting more upset. Um, and that administration was threatening EPA, so we needed to move a bit faster. And I was in contact with Gail Bingham and a number of other people who were sort of founders of the field, and got into the idea of negotiations, which I had done when I first worked at EPA on just administrative orders kind of thing and negotiation theory, but really got into it a lot more because the money that was spent on litigation could have cleaned up some of the sites. And I just went, this is nuts. Um, so I went to the first few meetings of the Environment and Public Policy Group, which was separate from ACR for a bunch of years. And I felt like I'd found my peeps, as it goes. These were people who had great ideas, a lot of grounding, a lot of stories to tell me, and who were all so open with sharing that I really, I really got into it, persuaded the bosses that I could go to trainings and conferences. And then I left EPA for 2 years to go to a public-private firm that was doing Superfund negotiations, and was able to actually be a mediator instead of being the right-hand person for the lawyers for EPA. And it was great. And 2 years later, I came back to EPA to really boost up the negotiated rulemaking program that they had started about 6 months, a year before. So it was great. I learned a ton. I got to, like Frank, I got to be mentored by Howard Bellman, which was great fun, and by Phil Harder, who is the father of negotiated rulemaking, by Gail Bingham, by Lucy Moore. It was just fantastic to be able to learn from people and to really know that they were enthusiastic about sharing. And then I decided we didn't have a really, it's the government, we didn't have a really good way of bringing mediators into our disputes. And it was just me and a guy named Chris Kurtz, so we couldn't do that. We were the ones who were persuading, analyzing cases and suggesting it. So I undertook inventing a contract which we could use to reach mediators, and a contract that would have mediators already cleared to get assignments to actually mediate these cases. And 30 years later, it's still there, and still serving the agency and still hiring folks. I'm not quite sure what kind of cases EPA is working through there anymore, the last year or two. But I took a lot of comfort in our 25-year, 40-year reunion back in October. So it still exists. But that's how I got in.
Thanks for that. I'm going to interrupt and do some chat requests that someone asked to confirm what CDIC stands for.
Oh, Conflict Prevention and Resolution Center. It's at APA.
Thank you.
And there's a similar one at Department of Interior. Will's on the line, I saw. So it's a separate organization within EPA that manages training, and consulting and persuasion and contracting, for public participation, public involvement, conflict resolution, conflict prevention. So, yeah.
And for those curious, on the Department of Interior side, that is the Office of Collaborative Action and Dispute Resolution, or CATER, which, as Ken shared at the beginning, Rebecca and Cameron also work on, and I previously worked on that contract as well. So I guess I'll briefly just share that's how I got into this.
Right.
Prior to Curtis and West, I will throw this out there because I'm curious, but I also worked at ELI, Sophia and Frank. So
Oh my.
funny connection we're making here. And was originally in international work, and graduated in grad school during peak COVID. So the international space was not quite as available to new entry-level workers. And I was advised from a great network of people to switch to federal focus. And that's how I ended up at Kearns and West. And I was working on the Cater contract as a contracts administrator and learned a whole host of new skills that I did not previously have. That has completely changed the way that I look at this work and kind of how the government functions, and just learned a lot in the 3 years that I was on that project. And then in the past year or two, have transitioned more to be focused on kind of the implementation side, in trying to focus on the environmental natural resource management things. But when I'm not working on federal projects, kind of doing a whole host of other conflict management projects.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is useful is to understand, for if you're working with the federal system, is to understand the federal system and the influence of budgets and lawyers and all that other kind of thing, that both makes the federal work interesting and productive, but also severely frustrating sometimes. We lose sound. Oops.
Oh, still good.
Okay.
I'm curious, Deb, too, if there's any specific lessons learned you want to touch on quickly. I think we have a couple minutes left before we have to turn it over to the group.
Right. So one of the things that I've found, one thing that I learned was how to help parties build coalitions, because with negotiated rulemaking, there's a limit to how many people you can have at the table. It's an agreement seeking process. And I co-mediated a negotiated rulemaking with for Department of Agriculture on the control of bees that come up and down the highways in the coastal and mid United States. If you can imagine 18-wheel trucks with millions of bees aboard that might have diseases. So assembling the parties for that and persuading Department of Agriculture as to who might be a party or who thinks they're a party, which when you look at it might not really be a party necessary to an agreement, but may be a party who could tank the agreement from outside, which in our system of thinking is usually a party, but not always with the other parties. And what I had was blueberry growers who are the last ones to receive bees because they live up in Maine or over in Michigan. And so the 18-wheelers that go up the coast or in the middle of the country are the last ones to get the bees, the most likely ones to get the diseases, or fewer bees. And I can't remember exactly, but the main growers are either high bush or low bush blueberries, and the Michigans are the other one. And they both wanted to be at the table along with almond growers and a ton of other people. It was so exciting to be in a regnig. I don't know. Anyways, so I basically worked with the two parties as to how they could get representation at the table together without having two bodies at the table. And so that's one of the things that I hadn't really taken had a lot of attention to before that. And the other one is, and it's hard for the government, is sometimes it's really useful to have the parties go on the road together. Now, we never went on the road with the beekeeping people, but we did go on the road with the lawnmowers and small gas-propelled engines. They actually invited us to their conference. Who knew they had a conference? And we had our monthly meeting there at the conference, and people could wander around and look at all the equipment and touch all the equipment that needed to be modified to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it just made a lot of difference at the next meeting because they had been there and they had touched it and they could see that, like for ice augers, for instance, there's just a limited amount of space that you can put a pollution control device on an ice auger. And I think the practicalities of taking the parties on the road where they have to all be on a bus or in a hotel for a day or two. It's expensive. Yeah, it's expensive. And you have to find the money for the parties who can't afford it. But it makes a difference in there. And the third really quick one is that theory thing that Frank and Sonia were talking about is that in the beginning in Regnegs, we used to run like a day-long training in interspace negotiation before they started. And it was very helpful because we would find them using those words when they were negotiating, or we could refer them back to the words interests and instead of them going at it like a bunch of lawyers. And it lost some foothold as it got more and more expensive to add a day. And everybody was going, well, we don't really have a day we can, do that. So we had to start getting imaginative about how to slip in some of these theoretical lessons into, say, the ground rules or some other ways to get them to use and think about the language of listening and that kind of thing. So.
Thanks, Deb.
I'm sure you guys all do that now. So,
real quick, I'll speak, I guess, in response to your second point, because I know we talked a little bit more about that like human component to the work that we're doing. And, as someone who's a bit earlier in my career, I haven't had as many opportunities to do these big mediations or big facilitations yet, but spend a lot of time thinking about like, what can I take from my past? And the thing that I found consistently has been incredibly helpful. And hopefully I'm not going to get myself into any hot water. So just bear with me while I explain this. I spent my first job when I was 13 years old. I started teaching dance classes with kids, and I did that all the way through into my 20s. I was an assistant teacher in college, both in undergrad and graduate school. So I've been a camp counselor, like spent a lot of time around kids, younger adults. And I think especially with the kids, you learn so much about the human process and human feelings by dealing with small children. They are like the epitome of what the human instinct is. And obviously that's not how adults act, but it starts to show you those signs of like when people get frustrated, when people are getting angry, you learn to read body language better. So this is one of those things that I always talk about when I'm reflecting on facilitations is that like I'm constantly paying attention to body language and tone and the way people are interacting and trying to pick up on those things that you see so large and big when you're working with kids, and you find the subtleties in how adults show those things. So I think it's just been like a big game of psychology for me since I started of trying to understand like how do I take all of this great knowledge I've learned from working with like base human instinct and apply it to working with adults who are working through these really challenging, messy, complicated topics that have personal, professional impacts to their lives. Like that's going to be tough on anyone. So that's really like the big lesson I've been taking coming into as I'm starting to facilitate these bigger meetings of just keeping that in mind that I do have the knowledge. So would encourage others who maybe are earlier in their career too, is like you definitely have some of the experience already. You just have to be a little bit creative about how you figure out what it is.
I love that. I love that. One of the things we did at the last conference that I ran for the EPP section was we had a whole morning where we had trainers in improv come in and teach us how to do improv. and it incorporated some of what you were just saying, is like looking at the body language and mimicking it when you want them to move in your direction, or the ways you can influence people through body movement, through other kinds of not spoken symbols. And it was a fun. It was a little scary for those of us who have um, it, less extroverted personalities in public. Um, but I think what you just said is fantastic. I like it. Maybe we'll make all mediators go facilitate kindergarten. And actually, I think sixth grade would be really great.
I'm going to step in just because of time, and I wanted to. I just Anna, I just going to. What you said made me think of something that I learned in my work from a a writer I really like, Gerald Weinberg, who's a systems theorist and also an advisor on consulting. And one of the things he says is that you have to listen really carefully to what people say. When you meet with someone for the first time who's got a problem, they'll tell you what the problem is in the first 5 minutes, but not in those words, not directly in the words. And the example that I have in my work is I was working in internationally in a country on reforming the forest law. Had a meeting early on with the head of the forest department there, and he said, "Oh, it's great to have you here. We have really a really good law now. We don't need much. We don't need many changes, but there's just one small change I'd like to make. I'd like my men to be able to shoot people in the woods and not have to go to court afterwards." And of course we couldn't do that. That's an international human rights thing. But he was telling me there, in not so many words, I have a real problem. My people have a real problem with their communities and how they relate to their communities. They're at war with their communities. And that's what we spent most of the I didn't hear that at first, but eventually that became clear to me. And we spent the team that I was with spent most of our time on that project trying to rebalance the relationship between the forest department and the local people. So anyway, sorry for taking up your time. We have a question for Anna. Anna, do you work online? And if so, how do you ascertain body language through the screen?
I was just
Mm.
typing out a response to that. So actually, since starting at Kearns West, almost all of my work has been virtual, which has been a very um, interesting challenge to adapt because I am very much a person who would like to be in person and be able to see these things, but a fun challenge nonetheless. Um, the thing that I've picked up on, and it mostly applies to working with clients, is really listening to tone and still hearing those changes. And kind of getting to know, if there's kind of these long pauses, like what's going on there. And I think the best thing I've learned is that, especially in a virtual space, like you just have to call that out and say, I'm sensing that there's a pause here. There's, a lack of response. Like, are we feeling good about this? And just saying all the things and calling it out. And I might be wrong. I think that's the other thing is I say this a lot all the time is like, I reserve the right to be wrong every single time. So just being okay with the fact that you might be wrong in reading the person, but it's always good to ask if you're starting to feel like there might be something that's kind of weighing on them in the conversation.
And there's a comment, Anna, showing your hands during a Zoom meeting from Irene Romero. Showing your hands during a Zoom meeting so others can see your gestures is so important.
Yeah.
I hadn't
Mm.
thought of that, but that's good to
Oh,
know.
that's interesting.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm opening the floor, please, for other questions. Do you ever ask, someone asked, Ken Newberger asked, do you ever ask the persons on the other end to sit further back to see more of their bodies?
Mm. Good
That's
question.
That's really interesting. So now I'll just say at the beginning of the pandemic, I asked a TV producer for advice on setting up my Zoom space. And he said, make sure your face fills as much of the screen as possible. And that's why I'm sitting so close. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should be sitting back here and gesturing with my hands more. Interesting. I've never asked someone who said it. I'm sorry. I'm tripping over your space. You're our guest. Anna, have you ever done that?
I would say, Ken, to your question, no, I haven't. And I think more of the challenge is just now getting people to be on camera at all because of
Mm.
constant Zoom fatigue. And that's just something that like we always have our cameras on. You'll notice I tend to sit back a little bit and use my hands a lot for that same thing that you were saying, Irene, is like, I want people to feel like they can be doing this. So yes, to Amanda's question, I do personally try to sit back when I'm facilitating and use my hands a little bit more to make it feel more interactive and try to get people to be engaged. But yeah, definitely it's tough when people want to be cameras off, and I get it because we're all a little tired of the online meeting. So that's where the listening to the tone and kind of the little side chats of like, hey, do you want to add anything? Really come into play.
Um, I'm wondering whether, because I haven't really ever, I was left EPA in 2017 before it became a thing to do big meetings by Zoom. I'm wondering if as a facilitator you put them on a big screen, it would make it easier to catch, even if they're only sort of like shoulders up, to catch their body language. Because on a little tiny screen, I'm right now on my phone because my computer refused to operate today. Um, so it's pretty small. But if for instance I had it on my big screen or even a bigger screen like we used to have at work, whether that would, you think that would be helpful?
Um, leave that question hanging because I saw we have one back from Frank. Uh, and I don't know if anyone knows whether the big screen is helpful or not. Could you share your competence in our field that you've learned the hard way that might be useful to those earlier in their career?
Yeah,
Asks
just
Mary.
briefly, Sophia and I were talking about this yesterday. My very first mediation, a community mediation, we had a landlord tenant issue, and the tenant said, well, I it was had dues in arrears, rent in arrears. So I will bring, well, they set up a schedule. They had all agreed to everything. She said, I'll bring my paycheck, after I get paid on Friday. And the person who owned the building said, "Oh, that's okay. You can wait. You can bring it in on Monday. You don't have to do it right away." And we sort of congratulated, the landlord is, "Oh, that's nice of you to do that." And then realized afterwards there may be all sorts of reasons why that tenant actually wanted to get the paycheck, and make that payment right away on Friday. And we just took away their ability to have that sort of self-determination. And so not substituting my judgment for other people's
Hmm.
judgment really, is a major, major um, issue. And that also can be, I can think of three major consensus building efforts where the temptation was we already had consensus, but there were people that were raising concerns. And instead of squashing those concerns, letting them come out and dealing with them and then getting a stronger consensus because of that. So those are mine. And I just got to share, Anna, I'm moving and I happened to come across this. I did a training from my daughter's second grade class. And this is Dear Mr. Dukes. I got into a fight with my sister. I did what you told me to do and it worked out perfectly. So I
What
take
did you
full
You got
tell
to
her to do?
frame, you got to frame that one, Frank.
Well, and are there other questions in the audience at this point? Because we're coming up to the end of our hour.
So,
And go ahead,
so
Deb.
I have a question about what kind of networking would, especially early and mid-career EPP types, think would be useful for them, since there's so very few in-person conferences anymore.
That's a great question. And if people could put in the chat in our audience what you think would be useful, maybe the local EPP people can start arranging some things like meetups or further sessions like this. Or if you could say what in this session, give us a little appreciative inquiry, what in this session worked for you that we can duplicate, that would be great. Uh, let's see things coming up. Uh, and let's see, certification. Oh boy, some questions popped up. If we have questions, we'll try that we didn't get to answer. Maybe we can reply to them later. I see Eva's put in speed dating. Uh, there's a university network for collaborative governance that people should know about, and that alternates between online and in-person gatherings, and those are helpful. Um, Someone asked, I see, do we have certifications for conflict resolution mediation? It depends on your local state. Like Virginia certifies mediators for court work, and that's a useful credential to have. And someone's, yeah,
Ken,
Hannah's
I would also say that the trainings that the International Association for Public Participation, IP2, has a great series of trainings for people who may not be mediating a dispute that's headed for court, but is dealing with figuring out where the best way to involve parties is across the spectrum. And they have a certificate you can get, and I've found that it's really pretty useful in a lot of situations. And particularly, I used it a lot in international work.
good to know. We are at time, and we probably should move on. I see someone says, "Good to see Howard Bellman." Howard Bellman gets the prize for the most mentioned name in this chat in this session, uh, and we will be sending out to folks again, sharing the email addresses of people who attended if they allowed us to share. If you have questions or thoughts that we didn't get to, or you'd like more information about ACR, EPP, or more information about getting more skills in conflict resolution, because I think we do have a lot of people here who sort of are curious about the field. Please write to one of the organizers, myself, to Eva, to Rebecca, or to one of the panelists, and we'll try and answer you back. And just thank you all to our panelists. Thank you to our panelists for coming. Thank you to our audience for participating. We couldn't do it without you, either, any of you. And with that, unless there are final words, I think we'll adjourn.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.